and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at B2B World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the economic situation of the country and, of course, in light of the IMF staff level agreement that was achieved earlier July. And, of course, moving forward, the board meeting is expected in mid-August. And so it's going to be interesting to see what sort of aspects and requirements the IMF will actually consider before the board actually sits down about this. Of course, in a lot of ways, we have seen that there is still feedback coming in from the IMF with regards to Pakistan's measures and policies, particularly with reference to exports and other measures that the IMF says can and should be improved. And this is something that Pakistan will need to take a look at. There is also, of course, the way that Pakistan will be utilizing its development and bilateral partners and assuring the bilateral financial agreements and money coming into the country. That, of course, will factor in when the board will actually sit down. For many, of course, the SLA is a potential move towards an agreement by the board as well, and also paves the way for an assurance on that front. However, there is, of course, the board that still has to sit down, and many considerations that need to be kept in mind to making sure that that actually does happen. In the meantime, of course, we're going to be taking a look at what this means in terms of Pakistan's own preparedness to deal with these matters. And while we, of course, hope for the $7 billion extended fund facility, there is also, of course, a lot of concerns in terms of the budget at home, in terms of the actions that need to be taken, in terms of the political conditions of the country, and then, of course, the way that this is going to impact the people at large, and what sort of measures will be taken for poverty alleviation, for development, to increasing exports, and many other aspects that, of course, are important in this discussion. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that in today's show and try to understand what is the way forward for Pakistan's economy and the direction, of course, that Pakistan will have to take in order to ensure prosperity. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh K.Pitafi and Faisal, and we've also been joined online by our guest, Dr. Vaqar, Joint Executive Director, SDPI, and Dr. Mahmood, Khalid, the senior economist. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the discussion and joining us today in the debate. And Dr. Mahmood, I'm going to start with you in terms of what we've seen transpire, especially since 12th of July. Of course, we see that we at least have the staff level arrangement. A lot of that was, of course, with reference to the success that we had in the SBA. But in large part, in the way that we see the conditions currently, and of course with the new government setup and the economic conditions that Pakistan is facing, there is still a lot that needs to be kept in mind. And I'd love for you to also outline the kind of challenges and aspects that are still under consideration by the IMF before the board actually sits down.
As you have just mentioned, the positive thing about all the economic statistics which we have seen over time is that we are heading towards a stabilization period. And normally this is what happens when we are engaged with the IMF, because initially in the first phase we are looking forward for stabilizing our macro variables such as the exchange rate. This is what we have seen, that the value has been stabilized. In fact, it has gone back to sort of the normal value. On the other side, the foreign exchange reserves are also gradually building up, and our revenue has performed very well in the last fiscal year. And this year, a very ambitious target is also set based on what has been achieved in the last year. But as you have also mentioned, that there are still few challenges which are also considered by the IMF as a precursor towards the extended fund facility, as well as the government is also considering. They have taken certain measures in the budget, but there is a lot happening on the other fronts as well. For example, there has been a target of exports which has been set over the 3-year period to be close to $60 billion, although this is something which is very ambitious, but still there is a lot of work being done on it in terms of tariff rationalization, thinking about how the import state taxes can be actually improved, and they should not act as a deterrent towards the economic activity and overall economic transaction cycle. What IMF is asking the government over the course of these structural measures is to try to pin down the cause of all these problems, such as the circular debts, the privatization of the state-owned enterprises, and by and large the fiscal deficit in terms of reducing the expenditures of the government by taking out departments which are sort of redundant or can be emerged. merged with the other departments. So hopefully, with the government's positive steps in the coming time, we are going to see more improvement on the growth side as well, along with the stabilization.
Right. Dr. Vaqar, there's of course a lot of ways that we are going to be taking a look at the situation, but I also want your perspective in terms of what you think will be the overall direction, with a particular focus in terms of the bilateral arrangements that also seem to be an important factor for the IMF, given of course that that's something that Pakistan will have to make a lot of efforts towards. Do you think that there is a way forward on that front, and that Pakistan will be able to achieve the kind of commitments that the IMF requires?
Yes, I think this is a very important question. There are two aspects to this. One, of course, is that in recent years, Pakistan hasn't enjoyed strong trust with the fund authorities. So despite of the staff level agreement, we have seen delays by the board, oftentimes during the previous reviews. So unless we really walk the talk, and whatever we have now committed as per the communique which has been released after the SLA, I think there won't be any other way to narrow down that trust deficit between the two authorities. It's going to be a much more difficult program, probably the most difficult program that Pakistan has seen. I think, of course, if local authorities have committed this, they must have thought this through. They are going to China now to discuss some of the things, given that IMF demands that many of the incentives given to SEZs would be phased out. And I'm sure there are other things in the communique which people have already read that needs discussion with China. You talked about bilateral aspects of this understanding. Chinese and the IMF authorities are also in touch on their own, trying to ensure, of course, that Pakistan remains in a good fiscal condition. And their shared understanding is also important to really consolidate the stabilization which Dr. Mahmood was talking about.
Right. Faisal, when we take a look at, of course, these aspects is also important in terms of what it is that we're going to be presenting and how exactly prepared are we to be able to meet these requirements and challenges. And we've seen previously also that there has been a lot of concern, especially in terms of the trust deficit that Dr. Vaqar pointed out in previous regimes as well, that a lot also factored in on who exactly was it that the IMF was speaking with, and what sort of teams were there, and what sort of preparedness level existed. And so, given today's circumstances, what do you think about how prepared we are in general in terms of dealing with these issues and taking the right measures for it? Do we have the right plans? Do we have a framework? Do we have a direction set up in how we're actually achieving the kind of targets that we've set up? Because many have called them ambitious.
Yeah, ambitious enough. And I think when we talk about the ambitions, any government who's going for taking a fresh loan from, of course, IMF, they have to have a plan, and they have to have everything drawn on the paper to show that this is what our plan is for next 3-4 years, and this is how we are going to pay back this loan which we are going to take from IMF. And in that context, of course, if we talk about the compliance, I mean, the current government, they have been since 2 years, I mean, previously their government, and then the interim setup, and then this current government, of course, they have been in compliance with the IMF's, whatever their reservations were and recommendations were, they have been complying with that. Of course, they knew that if they comply, that is the only route forward to catch on whatever we have lost in terms of our economy. And to me, I think them compliances, they are key. And number two, as earlier Dr. Khalid, Dr. Mahmood has rightly pointed out that, of course, we have to show IMF that in next 3 years we are going to export equal to $60 billion. And to me, I think there are several ways through which we can enhance, and that is what is on the paper to show to IMF. And the recent developments with the IMF, we have been successful in terms of convincing them that we are in a position to, of course, choosing a way forward for the country itself, and the country's economy would be able to, of course, fulfill all of the requirements for the future. And when we talk about how to give this money back, of course, the plan is there, and there are many opportunities for Pakistan's economy, especially when we know that SIFC is putting efforts, and them efforts are related to Pakistan's existing agriculture economy that needs to be boosted, and agri-tech is being introduced, and vastly the bumper crops, and the idea of bumper crops, and then generating more sources of exports from within that sector. And then there are many other sectors like mining, IT sector. These sectors are the ones you can consider that they can be pivotal in terms of sudden shocks to our economy, and they can actually produce enough for Pakistan's economy to, of course, not only linger on with the current circumstances, but to improve in future, and to, of course, pay back all of these loans. And Sana, if we talk about the loans, if we talk about the IMF programs, I mean, this is not the first program, and I think IMF should be considerate enough in this context that Pakistan has been facilitating itself from this IMF facility, and in past we have paid our loans back, and now when we are heading towards another one, this doesn't mean that this money is going nowhere. Of course, we are going to fix our economy, and we shouldn't be forgetting certain facts that actually contributed in destroying our economy. And of course, number one is, for 20 years we've been fighting war on terror. We lost nearly $220 billion in terms of our economic loss. And if we talk about COVID itself, I mean, COVID, for 2 consecutive years, we weren't the only country that was facing problem in terms of exports. But of course, Pakistan was one of them countries that was worst hit in terms of not exporting enough for our own economy. And in that context, I think IMF is considerate enough and should be more considerate in terms of facilitating Pakistan.
Right. And Farrukh, I want your take on all of this as well, but add to that another aspect that the IMF has pointed out in terms of the exports as well of the country, and in a way what sort of measures the country can take to actually boost them, and of course identify the kind of loopholes that perhaps already have been identified, but action that needs to be taken. And then of course the addition or usage of modern technology to actually ensure that from happening. And while that may seem simple enough, it is something that we've been struggling with, that hasn't happened so far. So what will be the road ahead on that front?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question, but allow me to actually first focus on certain things that was said earlier, because they are also important. Faisal brought up the quantum of losses that we had to endure because of war and terror. See, this is the most troubling thing that has I've never been able to swallow. Any country that has had that kind of losses would like to actually tell their story to all over the world, to the entire world, and then convince that we are the good Samaritans. One example that I have seen is when Six-Day War actually took place. After that, Israeli government realized that it had an image management problem, and then it came up with a Ministry of Propaganda that continues to this day, right? Usually what happens is that you should have acquired the services of lobbyists, image consultants and perception managers, but we don't seem to have done it at all. If you have really lost that much for the sake of the world, then you should find a way to actually get some kind of repayment as well. And for that, you have to have conviction and a way to convince the world that you are the actual victim. That never happened. I don't think why. Why is it that we keep on shooting ourselves in the foot when floods take place and somebody actually allows you to put some kind of board space elsewhere in their country to advertise whatever you want to, you end up talking about something else. So this is a problem of fraternities also. But regarding IMF and overall situation, look, stabilization is never easy. You have to have fiscal belt tightening, and we see that is continuing even as we speak. But then there is something very interesting that is going on. Remember that going to the IMF and getting any medicine from them is like asking for steroids. Every time you get some medicine that has steroids in it, your immunity has a serious chance of going down. And then the potency has to be increased every time you go back, because then your immunity is already down. With that kind of a situation, you keep piling on. And the biggest problem this time is that, unfortunately, because of the trust deficit that Dr. Vaqar was talking about, repeatedly, whenever we have gone to IMF, we are asked to actually go for a program that is front-loaded. Now, you had to actually pass the budget to ensure that all the commitments are met. And then you also had to, even in this agreement, staff level agreement, you saw that there is a caveat, and it is regarding Pakistan actually managing or getting the assurances that are needed for certain shortfalls of funds that will be needed moving forward. Now, our finance minister has gone to China. There we are going to also talk about panda bonds and how to float them, and of course various other things. But what is happening is, Sana, you must be very good at your job, you are a great anchor, but imagine that somebody asks you to sit on a platform that is too shaky, and then two people are asked to keep on shaking it all the time, right? And then the cameraman is running around and you have to keep focus on the cameraman or the camera screen. And finally, somebody actually decides that it is not enough. They bring up all the high potency lights, and they start throwing that in your eyes, and you have to read a prompter as well. I commend the government of Pakistan to keep their focus, but I think this is the kind of things that that are happening to our government. IMF keeps on putting pressure, then the internal dynamics, the political dynamics, then your own judiciary, then your own media, everything keeps on complicating the situation. So in that, I am not that optimistic about our exports. Our exports are especially, they have at the core of their being, they have the same industries that have been there for quite some time. And for past 10 years, repeatedly we have been told that if you don't actually manipulate the currency, if you don't actually, if you want to keep, rupee at some kind of stable position, then we cannot export. And the rupee actually fell and kept on falling, but even then our exports did not pick up. So my humble submission is, even in the time of fiscal belt tightening and all that has been going on for quite some time, growth is a distant dream, especially when your interest rate still is 20.5%. It is not a small amount. Till the time you don't bring it down, and then inflation is there, cost of living crisis has set in, and then we keep on hearing these astounding claims from PBS that actually the core inflation is going down. When you go to any stall, any vendor, what you find is prices are prohibitive. So with that kind of a situation, I don't think that we are in a position to focus on anything but stabilization for now.
Right. Dr. Mahmood, I want your perspective on that as well, especially in terms of the kind of tough times that we're in and the kind of decision making that the government has had to take and the kind of circumstances that we're in, particularly when we talk about issues of politics, issues of terrorism, and others that obviously impact the way we move forward on the economic front as well. And given that perspective, what is your opinion of the way that the government or the finance ministry has been handling with the IMF and the level of preparedness that they have?
You have mentioned it yourself that the Minister of Finance's hands are tied. They don't have much options except to accept the conditionalities which the IMF has put forth. And as Pitafi has just mentioned, that the inflation expectations are actually not down. This is what also the government itself is accepting. If you look at the targets and also the IMF projections, it's going to be more than 20%. So we would not see the interest rates coming down in the coming future. So that means still we are not very much free in terms of opting for the better policies. On the other side, the revenue is expected to increase by more than 40%, which itself is a very tough climb to cover. But in terms of, so if you want to evaluate particular institutions in terms of how good they are in terms of making the policy, it has to be seen under the circumstances. So from that perspective, there are certain signs which can be taken as in the right direction, but there are still many fronts which also needs improvement. And as you know that my favorite area is on the taxation side, we are still seeing policies which in this crunch situation is going to further create frictions in the businesses. Like for example, just yesterday there was an SRO by the FBR in terms of how they're going to launch the income tax collection from the retail sectors. We are totally with it that it should happen, but the way in which they have identified that it's going to be linked with the property values, the commercial property values, which are again based on the rental values and that mechanism. So it's going to be kind of a property tax which already is in the provincial domains. And on the other side, the problem is that when you look at the other policies, for example, the export targets of 60 billion, and if you are still going to focus on the 6 sectors which are provided with all kinds of reliefs in the past, that's not going to happen. On the financial sector side, we know that the government is the only borrower in the town. So there is nothing left for the private sector to borrow. So how to manage their financial needs? This is a very big question which Ministry of Finance itself doesn't have any answer. So we are in a difficult position, and we believe that Ministry of Finance's hands are tied. So in the circumstances, the policies which they are trying to make, that is something which shows the positivity, but still much can be improved. And as Pitafi has mentioned, that there are aspects which otherwise was not considered. For example, economic diplomacy. We need to improve our person sitting abroad in terms of working as an economic attaches or the economic counselors in terms of bringing in the necessary foreign direct investment and trying to create a positive image with the rest of the world so that more resources can be linked with the domestic markets, along with creating trust in the domestic market to create complementarity. So the road is very tough. The direction is to an extent right, but still lot can be improved.
Right. Dr. Vaqar, another aspect that is important, of course, is the issues of climate change and climate-induced disasters and their impact on the economic situation as well, and how they'll factor in this discussion. And we know that there has been ways in which this has been discussed previously as well. There has been also requests with reference to climate financing, perhaps through the RSF. What sort of aspects do you think will need to be kept in mind by the IMF when it looks at Pakistan through the lens of this reality, and whether or not that is actually seriously being considered in the numbers that are being talked about both by the IMF and the Finance Ministry?
And Dr. Vaqar, if you can also shed light on the pledges which were made to Pakistan, of course, in terms of climate justice and the sort of money which was pledged to Pakistan at that time when floods hit Pakistan. Where do we stand in that context?
Yes, thank you very much. Both very important questions. So I think, firstly, global community has been sympathetic to Pakistan, at least when it comes to climate hazards. Uh, they have recognized that Pakistan is the eighth most vulnerable country to climate hazards. Having said this, our lenders, donors, remain skeptic about our capacity to manage these kinds of funds. These are very sophisticated. These funds require very sophisticated mechanisms so that they're not fungible. There's transparency. There's accountability of how these funds are handled. And last time around, when the pledges were made, we saw that it was essentially the appropriation of donors' existing operations in Pakistan. So, which means that their savings or amount which Pakistan was struggling to spend in other projects was rediverted to, let's say, climate emergency when the flood came. And this is precisely because at that point donors felt that providing more money without absorption doesn't do any good to Pakistan, only adds to the debt burden, basically, because most of this amount which is given to Pakistan, at least at the rehab stage, is debt. It's not free from strings of debt servicing, usual debt servicing. That's one. Second is that it's not that we cannot mobilize climate finance on our own, but therein again, we need to do two things. One, of course, is that projects in the climate finance pipeline have to come from the provinces. And there, we believe that the federal government really needs to help the provinces. While federal government has an advanced understanding of climate finance, they have raised the NDRM, NDRMF. They have also raised the Climate Change Authority now. But we don't see that shared understanding at the provincial level. So provinces still need guidance on how to package proposals so that they can receive this kind of finance. And this is an understanding which development partners also share, because ultimately these funds will have to be managed by the provinces themselves. Federal government's Economic Affairs Division will be more of a route that they will take, but the management, the public finance management, will be by the finance departments of provincial governments. Finally, I think it's important that provinces as well as the federal government needs to demonstrate that anything that comes for emergency is not fungible. It is ring-fenced to address the emergency needs. This is something that we haven't done a good job at up until now, because, of course, we are hit from one crisis to another, and we have this habit of diverting funds which come for climate, environment, disaster risk management to other pressing needs, maybe social protection, social safety nets, or even politically motivated projects that go in our public sector development program. This is something which is not good practice globally, and we should refrain from it.
Absolutely. Faisal, this is also important, especially when we talk about the way that there'll be coordination among the provinces and the federal government as well, and the way that, of course, many actions need to be implemented. We keep on talking about reforms that are needed in various sectors, and of course, the Prime Minister, we remember as soon as he actually assumed this office, talked about a charter of economy, talked about the need to actually be on a united front at this stage. But do you think that while we, of course, talk about issues such as the menace of terrorism and how obvious it seems to be on the same page for that, unfortunately, it is not as simple as one would like. With issues of economy, of course, there are other challenges too. So what sort of aspects then will the government have to deal with, especially in terms of having consensus on matters, ensuring implementations, ensuring coordination with the provinces, with different political parties? What is needed on that front, whether or not this already has been started?
You know, better understanding is a sort of sentence that needs to be applied here for all of the political parties. Because Sana, if we talk about, the government, the current government and the federal government sitting, of course, in Islamabad on Constitution Avenue, and then if we talk about, the provincial governments, it's a sort of rainbow of political parties, and of course all of the political parties, they have their own agendas when it comes to, you know, how to facilitate people at large and their vote banks, and that is how they of course carry out their sort of governance when it comes to running the government. When it comes to different political parties, of course they have different political narratives, and if we talk about KPK, they are running in their own direction, and Sindh government, of course, it is in the center part of the government, federal government, and then if we talk about the Balochistan and Punjab, they too are part of the current federal government. So in this whole spectrum, one party that needs to be sat down with is of course the KPK government, and PTI needs to be sat down with, and the consensus in terms of how to deal with the terrorism, that needs to be sorted out, and consensus over economy, that needs to be sorted out. No one should be scoring political mileage on the basis of whatever the decisions are being made on the Constitution Avenue by the sitting government, because whatever government is doing, the current government is doing, that is in the best of the interest of Pakistan's economy. And the kind of situation right now Pakistan is in terms of economy, there are very tough decisions which are being made by the current government, but at the same time them decisions were need of the hour. As it is said that the extraordinary situations require extraordinary decisions to be made, and this is what is happening by the current federal government. Of course they are making, at the same time, the political discourse from the provincial government, that should be positive in terms of economy, in terms of war and terror, in terms of how the all of the insecurities must be dealt with. End of the day, all of them, they are Pakistan. They are the ones, all the political parties, they represent Pakistan. And when it comes to state itself and stability itself, be it security, be it economy, be it political security as well, because somehow political security is interlinked with all of the insecurities of Pakistan. All of the political parties, they need to sit together, and they need to, of course, build consensus and learn from the Western countries. No matter what happens, all of the political parties, they never ever compromise on the security of the nation and the economy of the nation.
Right.
They never ever compromise on anything that can of course bring any negative aspect towards state itself. So to me, I think reaching to a consensus on economy, on security, is need of the hour, and that must be achieved as soon as possible.
Right, and Farrukh, I'm sure you had something to say to that, but I'm going to add another question as usual. With reference to what we keep on hearing in terms of these discussions, there seems to be a lot of calls to action in terms of cutting spending and managing expenditures. And there has been a lot of such measures that the government has also talked about taking. And I want to understand how much of that is effective and how relevant that is in the long run, and what we're actually going to be achieving that, especially in light of what that means then for the people at large in Pakistan and whether or not it impacts them in the long run.
Right, Sana. I think that these demands are there. We keep on hearing more and more commitments regarding cutting expenditure, but then we see something very surprising. For example, a huge portion of PSDP actually goes to MNAs, or who are actually loyal to the government, or usually are influential in one way or the other in the name of development fund. That is something that could be totally avoided. Similarly, we are told that there isn't going to be any exemption, and amazingly, IMF actually keeps on pushing us for that. The ceiling should be lower and lower. More salaried people should be taxed, and taxed big time, then the same IMF actually takes Satu and goes to sleep. when you talk about exemptions to the rich and powerful, I mean, whatever the taxes you want to levy on my car, it is going to be a working class man's car. But then you are actually allowing people to import fortified vehicles worth crores, and there's exemption. So that's why I keep on saying that the only surefire way to survive in Pakistan is that you become rich. And that's why I keep on asking Dr. Mahmood to write that book as well. I don't know, one day he will.
How to be rich.
Yeah, how to be rich. But apart from that, Sana, another thing that keeps on, really frustrating, two things. Actually, earlier we were talking about economic diplomacy and we were talking about public or image diplomacy. And what astonishes me is, hapless Gaza has more people protesting for that on the streets of New York. Highly sanctioned, what do you call it, Iran is also, whenever there is a hearing on Iran, there are people who crash those hearings and come in and protest in front of camera's eye. But when Donald Trump actually, I don't know what caused that tweet or that meltdown, but actually shoots a New Year, spiel of tweets against Pakistan, all the media that had been hunting Donald Trump, remember the kind of madness that was there, left, right, center, they suspend disbelief and they agree that he is right on Pakistan. I mean, this is where you are at, despite having lost so much in the fight against terrorism. Then the argument, of course, is going to be, why the hell are we in it, right? And this is what we keep on hearing from the party that Faisal wants to engage with. But that is also a concern regarding how things are supposed to be. The second aspect regarding data, every time we talk about taxation, we are told that we don't have data and we are going to automate, we are going to do this, we are going to use this AI or automation or that sort of solutions. But amazingly, I was reading a book on India, and it's a beautiful book. It's called Whole Numbers and Half Truths by Rukmani S. And it is about how India's data is collated and what kind of picture it puts together. And amazingly, even if you avoid the latest interventions that are there from the state of India, even then the post-colonial infrastructure led behind a lot of places where data is collected. For example, Khatunis and Pattas or Patwaris, that is one aspect. Then the local government has a treasure trove of knowledge on who lives where, earns what, does what. The police thanas also do. Similarly, health clinics, hospitals or health departments, they collect a lot of data as well. Because it is not digitized, we don't know how to actually collate it, collect it and develop a 3D picture. When you talk about various softwares that actually are known for algorithms and they actually dig deep into your psyche, they need far lesser to know who you are. And they are so effective that they can predict what you are going to do, what kind of tea you are going to drink, at what time you are going to sleep tonight, and at what time you would be watching internet or television for that matter. So this is the kind of data that can be used, and we have treasure trove of that. And the government of Pakistan says, okay, we need to document, but please accept this CNIC based taxation, this value addition, this or that. With all that kind of confusion, the only thing that I keep on asking, I gave you the public diplomacy example and then this data and the economy. Do we have will to live? Do we want to move forward? If we don't want to, okay, let us decide for once and sink. If we don't, then let us start working like normal beings.
Right, and I understand that. And quickly, I want your take as well, Dr. Mahmood and Dr. Vaqar. I'll start with you, Dr. Mahmood. In terms of what we've discussed, and especially in terms of action that is needed by the government, particularly action that is meaningful for the people of the country, meaningful in terms of change for the industries, for people who care about the country, what exactly will then be required? Of course, we're looking towards the IMF, but especially in terms of the way that we want to move forward, what will be our next move?
Well, I can't predict in terms of what exactly Minister of Finance is thinking about, but what I always feel is that let's start working with what we can easily manage, and that is something which is related to the government's policy and the government's functionaries itself. So we need better coordination, and we need to really think about where exactly our regulatory sludges can be actually improved. This is the easiest way we can start working with, and gradually we can develop on it.
All right, Dr. Vaqar, I also want your perspective on the matter, and especially in terms of the issues with regards to development fund that Farrukh also pointed out, and whether or not there needs to be a change on that front. And add to that, how exactly will then there be measures for poverty alleviation also taken by the government, and what sort of mechanism will there be? We have an existing one, of course, but will that be enough?
Thank you. So I think in terms of our working with the IMF, I believe that Finance Minister's visit to China holds crucial importance. IMF's board is not going to go forward without having a shared understanding with China on the guarantees issue, on the energy sector, on the rollback of incentives which have already been given to projects like SEZs. I think there are a host of things which require discussion with China, and China's, of course, revised position on these issues would be necessary. We have already heard that several, of course, Chinese spokesperson have come forward saying that there may not be flexibility on the energy front, but we'll see about other areas. Likewise, we also understand that board will wait, IMF's board will wait for a nod from other two countries, which are Saudi Arabia and UAE. So this is Finance Minister's visit to China is important, but we'll also have to engage with Saudi Arabia and UAE for smooth undertaking of this fund program. And as I said, it's a much more stricter program, which means that every 3 months you are under a compliance where friends of Pakistan and their commitment would be very important.
And Dr. Sorry to cut you, Dr. Saab, but I just wanted to know one thing. Twice you actually mentioned special concessions that have been given to the SEZs. I wanted to know what is the nature of those concessions, because one place there I went where it is actually operational is Gwadar, and there I noticed that they are making their own electricity based on fuel, and that is very expensive. They are cleaning their own water. They are taking care of most of the things that are there at their expense, and there is hardly any concession. The only concession would be security. What else have we actually considered?
Yes. So, Faisal, you're absolutely right. So, the free zone in Gwadar is an outlier. So, I wouldn't like to discuss that, given that, of course, Chinese are operating it themselves. However, the other SEZs given to, of course, situated in our various provinces, Faisalabad, Rashakai, Dhabeji, Bolan. Now, all of these SEZs allow you tax breaks. They allow you preferential electricity and gas tariffs. They allow you preferential access to land and host of other things which are already mentioned on the Board of Investment's website. IMF, of course, feels that these incentives haven't led to any significant increase in foreign direct investment or luring investment interest, and they only lead to distortions or maybe opening up a door for those who may just situate an office over there and may never come over there to actually set up a manufacturing industrial unit. And this is why I think there's been an insistence on rollback of incentives.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Vaqar, for joining us, and thank you very much, Dr. Mahmood Khalid, for being a part of the discussion as well. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, as usual, for being part of the debate. That's all that we have time for. We'll now see you tomorrow.